This is Eric Rutan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
G'day everybody, thanks so much for joining me. This episode here is a repost of a chat that occurred back in June 2019 with the great Lee Harrison of Monstrosity and Terrorizer. Now the catalyst for the conversation was twofold. Terrorizer had released an album in 2018 titled Caustic Attack, and Monstrosity had just released a masterpiece too in the same year, 2018, The Passage of Existence. So I wanted to talk about those two albums, but I wanted to go far deeper with Lee Harrison because he's one of my favourite musicians of all time. He's got such a long and illustrious resume that I don't feel gets enough attention from mainstream metal types, or really any metal types, let's face it, but he's one of the Floridian death metal originals, and you'll hear all about why in the conversation. So let's get to it. Here he is, Lee Harrison.
Hey mate, Andy McKay Smith calling for our chat. How you going?
How's it going, brother?
Yeah, really good, man. Really good. I really appreciate you making time for this. Sorry for haranguing you or bugging you a little bit about this one here. But look, let me tell you, I've been looking so forward to the potential or the possibility of us being able to have a conversation, because I must say, mate, from the outset, you're probably one of my favourite musicians of all time.
Awesome, dude. Thank you, man.
Well, I tell you when it started, back in the day when I picked up Millennium, I was thinking, who the hell can drum like that? Because the only other person that can drum like that is Pete from Morbid Angel, Peter Sandoval. And lo and behold, in 2018 and 19, you're in a band with him, but you're on guitar.
Yeah.
And that was, mate, I can't, how you jumped across the guitar. I mean, I mean, apart from people within your inner circle and people who are really familiar with you, who would have thought, mate? But you are an extraordinarily gifted musician, I must say.
Thank you, bro.
You know,
yeah,
mate,
it didn't just happen. I put a lot of work to get that way, so.
Yeah, I mean, but it's the other thing. A lot of people they have designs on these sorts of things, but in the same year, you've appeared on certainly easily one of my favourite death metal albums of the year with Monstrosity. But then you go on drums, and then with Terrorizer, you're on guitar playing it's a very tight album, that one there, the Terrorizer album there from last year, mate. So, mate, I understand that with the Monstrosity thing, things take time. I think I was reading somewhere that you started the recording process in 2011, and it went right the way through to last year or the year before or thereabouts there, mate. But how do you make time for these things? And I'm alluding to the quality of everything that you do. Okay, so you make time for these things insofar as you say, okay, I'm going to do these things, but then they're all of extremely high quality, mate. So I'm assuming you've got a day job as well. So how do you fit everything in?
Actually, since 2001, I've been able to do music only. I was working in a bakery in the 90s. And I never, had to tour. I never had to turn down a tour necessarily or anything because of my job. I was always lucky with that. But it just got to a point around 2001 where I was touring a lot more. And I just ended up, kind of letting those guys know, that I wasn't going to be around as much. And it just worked out where I didn't have to go back to having a regular job. And then I played music with some cover band stuff, and so it's not all like original music while I'm out touring. It's local work too. And basically since about 2004, I've been playing every weekend since then. And that gives me my week, the time during the week to kind of put towards music, writing, and doing the original projects. Yeah. So I like that a lot better than having a real day job per se.
Yeah.
But it's still playing music, so it's keeping with kind of my original plan, to do music full time.
Well, it's so great to hear that a musician of your capability plays covers, because I do as well, actually. I certainly don't play it every weekend. I stopped playing it every weekend because I was getting burnt out. So when you say you're playing covers, are you on the rock cover scene there or the tribute band scene over there?
It's whatever hires me, pretty much. I've been with this one guy, Joe, that pretty much most of the time. But I've done, country work. I've done different kinds of, playing bass, playing guitar, playing drums. So it's not just been one thing either. But kind of whoever hires me, and if it's something that that makes sense,
Yeah.
I don't mind doing it. Plus, I've done some session work did some session work for a Doom guy doing a Doom project. And I work with some other kind of singer, like kind of more power metal singers. Got a couple projects going like that, where it's kind of, like I'm in the background really, but, it's more or less being their backup band, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of playing everything. Because I do my own project, the rock project, The Poison, which is my solo rock project where I do it all, and that's more focused on my vocals for me personally. Like that's the, kind of the thing with that. But it's just with that thing, it's one of those things where I just don't have a budget to do a real album, and I'm just kind of holding off until I can get something going with that. Because I want to, I got some good songs written. I got like 60 songs probably, and they're just kind of waiting in the wings until I can get a proper budget, and then I'm going to pick my 10 best and just go in and record them. I got demos of them, but I want to get them. I want to kind of step it up as usual. That's my thing. To me, production's a big part of it.
Yeah, okay, that's heartening to hear that. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest death metal musicians of all time is making ends meet by playing all sorts of other genres, because I'm not a death metal musician. I've actually never played death metal. I've got to put it on my hand and say that, apart from my love for the genre. But the covers that I play, disco, funk, a lot of Australian music, like Australian music from the 80s and 90s, this sort of stuff here. But it's just about performing, isn't it, really? It's just about being in front of people, and in your case, it's a job, really. And look, I'd love to do it as a job as well, because I'm at university. So for me, I'm actually I'm in one band, and I'm trying to get like a hard rock band where we play like Guns N' Roses and AC/DC and Whitesnake and all that sort of stuff, because I really see an opportunity there to do that. But I want to get some younger musician around me and do it, because you can sort of be around musos who are a bit jaded and don't put in the time and the effort to really put in a good show for people. But I guess from your perspective, man, you're an all-rounder. Okay, so guitar, bass, drums, vocals. When did you work out that you could do it all? Was it something that happened through high school or even earlier?
Well, it just goes to my overall story. Back when I started playing, well, when I first got into music, I was possessed by Kiss, at like 7 years old. And they were kind of, that was like, fantasy world. But like at the same time, it was, what you want to do as a kid. You see Gene Simmons spitting blood, and it's cool as hell. But anyway, long story. I wanted to play guitar first, but I'm left-handed, and my dad wouldn't let me play. He wouldn't, let me turn the guitar over and play left-handed. So he forced me to play right-handed, which now I'm thankful for, because I can play a guitar that's right-handed, and everybody plays right-handed, so it's much easier for me to play a guitar that's right-handed. So that. But at the time it was kind of discouraging, because I couldn't immediately play, in my head, I couldn't immediately do what I wanted to do. And my dad came at me with, he was a pilot, and he had a pilot buddy that owned these apartments in South Miami. And he had this guy that was a drummer at the University of Miami, jazz. He was in the jazz department or whatever. And he was a drum instructor kind of on the side, and he was doing lessons out of his apartment, and I would go there weekly. I started with that. It just kind of is something to do, really. I wasn't necessarily totally into the drums, but I wanted to play music. It really, it wasn't defined with guitar, so like I just went ahead and tried the drums. And then like the first lesson was okay, but with the second, I think it was the second lesson where he just, kind of let me go off on the drums and like really just kind of whatever I wanted to play. And that's when I really, drums clicked in for me. And I took it more serious. And We started with the book Stick Control and just doing the exercises out of there and doing different, he would do like 15 minutes on the pad and then 15 minutes on the drum set is kind of how our first lessons were. Just going with that more and more. And then I had a local guy that I was jamming with, two guys, Brace Boone and Brian Hartcock, and we had a little band called Ozone, and they would have their guitars laying around when we were, not practicing or whatever, so I would pick up the right-handed guitar and play a little bit, and as time went on, I would get, a little better at it. Then I think I even had an acoustic for, not long after that, and so I would play, I was playing right-handed guitar, and then just slowly and surely it got better. And around 13, I went out and I bought like a Kramer Striker and like a little amp. And that's when I started playing guitar a lot more. And then I was just kind of doing these demos where like I would record the drums on a little tape recorder, put them in my stereo, play them loud, and then record, on top of that, and then record those two. It was like basically like cheap 4-track recording, but it was just very primitive, I guess. And it was just they really were horrible tapes at the time, but it was just enough to keep me going, and then I did, I saved up for my first drum set working at a movie theater for $3.35 an hour, which is basically nothing. And it took me a year probably to save up. And finally got my kit, and then when I was 18, I packed up my van and moved to Miami, and became friends with the Cynic guys.
Nice. Yep.
Which they were already together. They were like a thrash band back then. And I met the original bassist for Monstrosity was in Cynic at the time. Mark Vanner, he was playing bass, and I met him, and we ended up rooming together later on. And but at the time, I was with these guys from Homestead, and we were trying to this one guitar player guy. We were trying to, me and a singer, were trying to get this band going, and it was just a struggle. It never really happened. So I kind of ended up becoming more of a roadie for Cynic at the time, just because my thing wasn't happening, and theirs was, So like me and Mark Van Erp, we would drive around and pass out flyers for Cynic and do stuff like that, and I would, help them just, load drums and stuff like that too. But then later, Malevolent Creation moved to town from Buffalo, and they had a drummer, but they weren't happy with him, this guy named Joe. And so he was always telling me, oh, get ready. So at some point I ended up moving to Fort Lauderdale, which is like an hour north of Miami, and ended up joining Malevolent for, 9 months or so. And that, that was going good, but then at some point it didn't work out, and I was back at home kind of with, not sure what I was going to do. And then at that point I was talking with Atheist, Roger Patterson.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Had seen us, he'd gotten our demo, and the Malevolent demo, and he really loved the Malevolent demo. And so I was talking to him, and they were talking about how their drummer was going back to college and all this stuff. So I was talking with them a little bit, and then I was also doing my own. I had a project called Submission that I was kind of had started when I was in Malevolent, kind of on the side, where because I had a 4-track, and ended up doing some demos or whatever with that. And I ended up writing a bunch of songs. I wrote 9 or 10 songs, and recorded those in 1990. And then a lot of those songs ended up becoming, I ended up kind of like picking and choosing, and some of those songs, were on the Imperial Doom album, like some of the main riffs, like Burden of Evil. A lot of that stuff was on the Submission demo, and Definitive Inquisition, like the chorus riff, and there was like some middle section parts that were from my Submission demo.
Yep.
So I kind of always had that, and then I ended up doing Monstrosity, and really, I was still playing guitar and writing for Monstrosity, but I didn't really have a plan to like play guitar out front.
Yep.
And then it was, I would say 97, I started doing a bunch of covers, recording a bunch of covers, kind of solo thing. And I met this singer guy that was kind of like a Dio Dokken kind of voice.
Yeah.
Crossed, and he was a really good singer. And so it was like, okay, we write some rock songs for that. But the guy ended up flaking out on me. And finally I just decided, for better or worse, I'm just going to go ahead and sing. And it's, I don't have to depend on a singer, and it'll just be me. And for better or worse, if I don't know, I won't name any now. Well, we can say like a Bob Dylan type. If that guy can sing, or if in my head, Neil Young, even though he's great and whatever, but at the time I was thinking like, if that guy can make it, or whatever, singing. And
I know what you're saying, yeah.
Just. Yeah, whatever, but so it's kind of like that was my thinking on that. So I just, I've been doing that, and I've had a couple lineups together. We've done a couple shows. They haven't gone that great, to be honest, but just because the people didn't learn their parts, but we'll say that.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things now where it's kind of like, well, I want to get the album done first and actually have something to promote. And so that's kind of how the guitar thing came about. It was just through always being around a guitar player and writing for Monstrosity and doing my own little rock projects and stuff.
Yeah, great. Okay.
So there's the long answer.
No, it's a wonderful answer. There's so much detail in all of that. It's where do I start? Okay, so you talked about Roger Patterson, atheist. Okay, so for those people who are listening who don't know, because of course I'll let you know, if you're cool with everything, I'll release this as a podcast episode because, mate, I was searching online and I couldn't see any podcast episodes that you were featured in. So that answer there's awesome because it gives people so much critical information. It's a critical information summary, if you like, of Lee Harrison's career. And you mentioned so much in there. And one of the things, as I just mentioned, was Roger Patterson from Atheist. Now, unfortunately, he's no longer with us anymore. But that name there references the fact that you are a death metal original. You are one of the guys that was there really when in the embryonic stages. Imperial Doom, great album. And then a couple of years later, I think probably the greatest, and I consider it a tech death metal masterpiece, Millennium. It wasn't received that well, I don't think, at the time, but I think as years gone by, this is going to sound like a naff comparison, but Weezer, the band Weezer, when they bought out Pinkerton, big Weezer fan I am, and when they bought that out, people hated it. And they didn't understand it. But, of course, in the intervening years, it's been hailed as a classic. And I feel the same thing has happened with Millennium. Okay, there. So you've... That album...
Actually, honestly, the Cannibal DVD kind of helped push Monstrosity, that album. Kind of like it wasn't until then that, that's when it really people...
Caught on.
Started to change their tune as far as that album, I mean, I think people liked it too, but like for us, when we played it live, you could just see it going over people's heads. They just couldn't. It just wasn't an album where like they could bob their head to.
Well, it was ahead of its time. It was actually people. I remember commentators like I can't remember what magazines it was at the time, but they were making fairly disparaging comments. Actually, they're saying, "Oh, this is just this is just technical death metal. It's not 1991 anymore. This sort of thing." And I'm thinking. Nobody's produced an album like this. I mean, not even Legion by Deicide sounds like this. This has got you didn't just write that album, Lee. You engineered that album. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot that's gone on in that album there. And I listened to it. I reckon that was one of my most like the one death metal album I probably listened to the most over a long period of time, if that makes sense. So I'd listen to that one when I was training gym. I listened to that one in the car, just trying to figure out all the different parts because there was so much going on. But I think when you listen to bands now like Archspire, and I've spoken to the drummer, from Archspire, the Canadian band, who are
Right.
probably the leading light in tech death metal these days. There, and I don't know why I didn't ask the question. We're talking about so many other things, but I reckon they've heard that album, mate, and they've gone, "Yep, this is what it is. This is what it sounds like. This is the music that we want to create too." So, do you get a lot of that feedback from people when they particularly? I'm talking about Millennium, but also In Dark Purity as well. Do you get a lot of that sort of feedback that it's been a very inspiring album for musicians?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say if it's, yeah, you get people coming up, but they kind of say it anyway, you know what I mean? It's hard to tell, like, because people are nice, you know what I mean? They don't want to, I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
It's hard to judge, you know what I mean? Because, but yeah. But for us as a band, like the first album, the drums were real dominant and the guitars were kind of buried in the mix, and then the way they were recorded, they were like triggered in a way that they were like, it's real one-dimensional. There's no dynamics in the triggering. It was kind of I call it the 1989 triggering model. And just because everything was real, steady. There's no like ghost notes or everything's one level as far as if it's triggered. If it's a triggered snare, it's one level. If it's a triggered kick, it's another level. You know what I mean? So it was real dominant with Millennium. We kind of wanted, obviously we needed, that wasn't our goal, was to kind of like dial it back, and like, it just ended up being that the kicks are natural, and, it's more of a natural drum sound. Mm-hmm. And with In Dark Purity, we felt Millennium had kind of lost some of the power because of because we'd gone, we were extreme one way on Imperial Doom, and we kind of went extreme the other way on Millennium. So like the idea with In Dark Purity was kind of have the balance where it was still like the kicks are triggered, but it's not like, it's not overly triggered where it's just all one dimension and just one sound. There's a little bit of life to it, and but it still has the power that, kind of the modern productions at the time were having,
Yeah.
Because that was the thing, is it just like the power of Millennium, like it kind of, it doesn't like just because it's so natural, it doesn't really like kick you in the face like I would personally like,
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. I think the production is great for the reason that it works really well when you're listening to it in the car. It's one of the few death metal albums.
But it's more of a, for the organic people, you know what I mean? The guys that like the organic style, they love that one, of course, because it is, more organic. But, to me, In Dark Purity kind of brings it back where it's more in the middle of those two, the first two, and it was kind of like In Dark Purity is the first album where I really felt great about the production.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. What's the
we were
album?
Just struggling,
Sorry about you. Go.
What's that?
Oh, I was just asking which. I think the most recent album, and we'll talk about this in a sec, the Passage of Existence. I think this is your best album, I've got to say. But aside from that one, you had how many albums have you had out? 5 albums under the Monstrosity banner. Which is the one that has sold the most? Or I mean, it's probably hard to get a lot of that data, but which is the one that you feel has sold the most?
Yeah, that's a rough one. It's hard to say because it's just, it was like, for example, In Dark Purity, there was like 16 or 17 different versions when you count like the Polish edition, and there was like a cassette version. There was like Metal Age released it. Then they did kind of like a primitive version, I call it, because they actually rushed it and like released it before they even knew what the song titles were actually called.
Jeez,
and so like there's like Hymns of Tragedy became Hymns, Suffering to the Conquered became Suffering. There was a song called Pillars of Drear that didn't even have a title at the time. It was like on the test mix, it was called Slow Gimmick. So they just took that and called that, they called it Slow Gimmick. So,
oh God, okay,
which we didn't even have a song, it was called Pillars of Drear in the end. But at the time, they used like we didn't even give them the actual art. They just had a laser print of the cover. So they made the whole thing off that.
Oh, God,
that was a whole other issue. So there was that version. Then they tried to make it up. They released like a shape disc version and with like a saw blade shape, whatever. And so there's that version. Then Hammerheart did Digipack version. They did the vinyl, blah, blah, blah. So it's, as far as actual numbers, who really knows? It's really hard to say.
Yeah, well, I think
obviously Nuclear Blast had a bigger distribution thing going on in the beginning, and according to them, we had sold like 36,000 originally, and like who knows, probably
that's not bad.
In the end, I don't know what the final numbers were, but so like I'm gonna guess the first album and maybe the the Metal Blade stuff, just since they have a big distribution chain, but. We did okay, considering for a long time we really didn't have, a lot of help. It was kind of us on our own with Conquest Music, and things went good with that. But we just kind of ran into brick walls as far as the distribution. A lot of money going out and not much coming in, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So have you?
But, we've always kept it going, and the deal with Metal Blade, we had we did Conquest Music in America, and then it was Metal Blade Europe for Rise to Power. That album did okay. Spiritual Apocalypse to me is a better album. That was kind of we really at the time we really loved the production. The new albums kind of dominated it even more, but. We're happy with Spiritual and the new album for that matter. But we put a lot of work into it too. We were running 2 rooms at the same time for Spiritual. We had the A room, we were doing bass in, and the B room we were doing leads and vocals. So it was kind of crazy because we had a tour coming up. So that was the first time that we had done that. When we were actually operating in 2 rooms at the same time. Which was a little crazy, but in the end, the product was killer. We were real happy with it at the time. And the songs are great. And again, with it was Metal Blade Europe and Conquest Music in America. And then for the new album, when we finally delivered it, we were going to do the same thing, Conquest in the U.S. But they offered to take it for worldwide, and just to kind of see if maybe it would go a little better, since they would maybe put a little more into it, since they had a little more invested into it. We went ahead and decided to go that route for this album, and now we're pretty much free agents. We can do what we want for the next album, and we'll see what Metal Blade thinks, and we got a few other offers going too, so
cool.
And I got half the next album already written. I have 4 songs demoed, and Mark has a song called Locust, and I have the skeleton for 2 more where basically I have the drum tracks, but the riffs aren't actually written. They're just kind of I can hear them when I listen to the drum tracks. I can hear in my head what I'm trying to go for. You know what I mean? But I don't have the physical riffs yet.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens then too is I'll come up with my version of it, and then I'll send them off to one of the guitar players, and they'll usually take it and take it up a few notches technicality wise. Kind of that's how Eyes Upon the Abyss from the new album was. It was a case of where I had to if you hear the demo of it, you can hear the main theme, but it just doesn't have all the intricacies of all the riffing that's going on. So Matt Barnes, for example, took care of that, and he just kind of whipped it up into a couple notches higher than it was.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a song like Proselytize was kind of kept the way I wrote it. They added their leads to it, but for the most part, the riffs are all the same.
Yeah. Well, you got
Slaves to the Evermore, similar like that too, and then Eternal Void is kind of one where it was taken and notched up a few notches. So I'm sure that'll happen with some of these new songs too, that I have. But so I would say roughly call it 5 to 7 songs, depending on how you want to count it. We still have lyrics to write and all that, so they're not totally complete. But I have ideas for that too. So
great. Okay.
I don't think it's going to take 11. The idea is not for it not to take 11 years.
Well, look, these things, you're not Tool. At the end of the day, how long have we been for then? 14 years or whatever.
We've always taken like 4 years was kind of the average, and that was just because, I figured 2 years to promote the record, at least, and then probably another year to write it, and the next record, and then another year to record it all and get it ready with art. This time there was just so many, issues, like with, we took forever, like you said, we actually started writing the record in 2011, so like there was a few years already gone. I decided to take the band off the road so we wouldn't be like out there trying to like do both at the same time, which I don't know if that was good or bad. It's hard to say at this point, but the idea was that we would come back and time the tour with the record more, and unfortunately that didn't work out either, but that's a different story. So 2015 is when I actually did the drum tracks. Okay. Mark took his time doing the guitar, so it was like, a lot of time spent on that. And then when it came to the mixing of it, we weren't ready for his first date, so like he ended up pushing us back till like from like October till April, so that was like a whole nother. It wasn't his fault, the guy that mixed it, Mark Lewis, but, it's just the reality of, trying to work this way where it's kind of, actually where we send, I'm used to sitting on the couch and being in front of, the speakers and hearing every EQ tweak and every little drum edit and every little reverb and you know what I mean? Whereas this way it was kind of sent to us through the internet, and it was like, okay, from here make your changes, which is a great idea because I can hear it on my speakers that I'm used to hearing it on. It's not like that was the problem with the first album, is that, it sounded great in Morrisound, but then when you put it on cassette, and go and listen to it on another system, and all of a sudden it doesn't sound the same, because your ears are used to hearing it. You know what I mean? It's just different. I don't know how to, it just is. So, like, we got into more sound, and, it sounds great, but like I said, it just didn't have that punch. So, with this new album, mixing, I call it mixing through the internet, but, it's basically he would send me an MP3 and then, or whatever, wave file of the track and, make your adjustments from there. Okay, well, for this, like, those guys are pros. They know where we're going with it. So, like, it was really almost done. The only thing that we really tweaked with was, like, the bass level, So, and it was actually louder than what it is on the album. We just kind of got fine-tuned it a little more. Yeah, we fine-tuned it a little bit. And you can hear the bass as it is. So, like, we're real happy with it. It's kind of like a new dimension to our music. When I actually started playing bass with a cover band, I learned a lot more about bass than I knew before. So I do give bass players props. For it takes it's hard on your fingers, really hard, and just trying to write more with the drums and like keep it. It's the same key, but it's not with the unison guitar parts.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Kind of like a lot of the previous albums kind of had that, where it was just following the guitar all the time, or just like every once in a while there'd be like some bass part that would stand out, but otherwise you're just unison and everything. So like with this album, like the goal was to have unique bass parts. And kind of like, because that was the argument, if you're just going to play the unison guitar parts, then all you're doing is adding mud by turning the bass up, where if you actually have something that's different and that complements it, you can still have it in the mix and you can still hear it, and there's good tone. You know what I mean? So it's a way for the bass player to shine.
I'm a bass player, and I know exactly what you're saying.
Okay, there you go.
The thing about bass is that I did a little bit of session work over the years, but I'll never ever forget, and hopefully this will make you laugh, because I remember years ago I did a session about 15 years ago. Remember that singer James Blunt? He's from the UK, and he had that "You're Beautiful" song out. Remember that one?
I can't say I do, but I think
it's a very soppy song. But my point about the song is the bass is non-existent in it. I mean, you really can't hear it unless you've got headphones on and you're really focusing on it. It's really there just to fill out the sound. But I'll never, ever forget that I did my bass lines to this session that I was at, and it was a fairly creative bass lines, exactly what you were saying, following where you need to. But at times I was riffing a little bit, and I was putting some extra things in there, what I call salt and pepper, or I can't remember what Larry Graham used to call it, but he used to have a name for it. Okay, so you support the riff, there's no doubt, or you support what's going on in the music, but then when there's an opportunity as a bassist, you branch out and you let yourself be heard. And I'll never forget, I did the session and then was driving back from the session with the guy whose band it was, or whose project it was, and he put on James Blunt and he said to me, "Man, this is actually what I want you to play bass like." And I said, "Mate, there is no bass in it. It's not there." And he goes, "Yeah, but this is it. This is what I want you to do." And I'm like, "Well, I just won't turn up. I just won't turn up then, and then you'll have your bass. You'll have your bass line. Then you can just do whatever the hell you want, really." And I didn't say that in a cynical way. I just said, it's like bass guitar, not just in death metal, but in almost all genres of music. When you don't have someone who has an appreciation for it like yourself, gets marginalised completely. And from my perspective, and I'm sure this is the case even for a lot of non-bass players, who people who are musicians who have an appreciation for the musical side of things, when you can't hear the bass properly, I think those albums, they don't stand the test of time overall, particularly metal albums. And I noticed it on The Passage of Existence. I truly did. And that's an album that I owned in 2 formats. So did you get one of the cassette versions from Greece? Did you end up getting one of the cassette versions?
Yeah, I did, actually.
Yeah, I did. And it sounds killer over cassette. And you can hear the bass over cassette really well. So there's it's an album, if you like, that works really well using a reel, so on tape, of course. But I'm just so glad to hear that you're a musician that I respect enormously, and you've figured out that the bass is an instrument that is worth hearing.
Right. Yeah, that was another thing, is that kind of like in our, I'll call it through the 90s, through, even the 2000s at some point, we were always, like, the bass player would, for the 16th note, he'd be trying to play so fast to keep up with that, and like, whereas I learned, it's a little less flashy looking maybe or whatever, but you're going to hear the note if you just do the 8th notes, and let the rhythm of the drums, like, carry the 16th note, and, because at some point we jammed with this guy, and he could do the 16th notes at the tempo that we wanted, you know what I mean? And it just, like, what we noticed is that it actually sounds like a generator going off, it's like a clicking more, so like what you, like in our head, that's what we wanted, like as, kids or whatever. I won't say kids, but you know what I mean? Like in our head, we wanted a guy that could play super fast, that was so impressive, blah, blah, blah. But then when you actually get what you want, maybe you don't want it, So like, it's kind of like more like, it was kind of like, like what would happen with that is like, you'd have, parts where like the bass is playing and he's like maybe not doing the 16th notes, and you got tone, and then all of a sudden the fast parts come in and he's going for that 16th and the tone just disappears, So that's what I noticed, like, so that's why I kind of like with Passage of Existence, we kind of like toned, like even spiritual, but just kind of a time reason more on spiritual. Yep. We just kind of dumbed down the bass parts, you know what I mean, and like made them, 8th notes, and just like let the drums create the 16th note feel more. And then with the new album especially, it was like each part is like definite, so that like that way the tone's there, because to me there's nothing worse than all of a sudden you got bass and then all of a sudden the tone just disappears as soon as it goes into a fast part.
Yeah.
So that's our thinking with that, and just if you can write bass parts that are that kind of like stand on their own, then you can actually turn them up a little bit too.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed on that point there. That's why, everybody knows Steve DiGiorgio, and we mentioned already Roger Patterson. These are guys that really knew how to make the bass stand out but never detract from the song. I think probably one of the greatest metal performances on album, bass playing metal performances on album, would have to be the Control Denied performance by Steve DiGiorgio, The Fragile Art of Existence.
Okay, well, I'll go one further and say Death Human, because like there was that whole, like, I don't know if you've heard the drums and bass mix, but there was like a whole Yeah, like check it out because they actually put some songs on like the re-release or whatever, just the drums and the bass, and it's like when the first mix came out, the bass was basically buried, and so like you know that okay, yeah, it's Deaf Human, but at some point like we had the cassettes earlier, but like when they released the drums and bass version, it's like a whole nother it's like I call it like a sea, underwater, a whole nother universe underwater basically, because there's all these sick bass riffs that are going on with the drums that you just totally missed because they were buried,
Yeah.
And
I can imagine.
I strongly advise you to check that one out because it's like it's those songs, but in a way you've never heard before, And
definitely
it's really great stuff.
Yeah. So that must be on the physical copy. Is it the CD version? Maybe I don't know.
I think it's on YouTube. I don't know. Here, I'll look right now. I think they're on YouTube. Deaf Human bass tracks.
It'd have to be on YouTube, wouldn't it? These days, God, everything ends up going up there, doesn't it? I actually...
Yeah, they're up there. Suicide Machine and Together as One.
Yeah.
Finding Emotions.
You'll appreciate
this.
Yeah,
so check those out and you'll hear what I'm saying, where it's like just like it's like a whole other universe that's going on that you never even knew. Like if you're just used to hearing the album, it's cool to just throw those tracks on and hear what he was doing because it was great stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a
love Steve DiGiorgio. It's great.
Oh, he's a wonderful musician, very underrated, I think, and of course that all comes down to the fact that he plays bass, and people don't have a broader or as much of an appreciation for the bass guitar as they do the guitar. But
never mind the fretless business.
Yeah, I don't know how he does that.
It takes talent to you got to have your ear in order there. Otherwise. It just doesn't match up with the guitar right. It can sound odd. You can sound like you're playing out of tune.
Yeah. Hey, did yours and Chuck's paths ever cross? Because I mean, you're an extremely talented musician, mate, and I think he could have used you from working with you from time to time. So, was there ever an opportunity that you and him could have joined forces back in the day?
We never. He was kind of going with his thing, and I met him. They played the Cameo Theater in Miami when he was with Terry and Bill and Rick, and I met him then. And we would drive up to Tampa, and like Death and Morbid Angel were playing. We'd hang out with them then, go to the store and get Big Gulp, and get a candy bar or whatever, and go back to the venue and hang out some more, and like they'd play or whatever. And then that happened numerous times. And then when they were doing the Deaf Human rehearsals, I guess I was actually doing I had done kind of like where I wrote all the music kind of thing. It was called Witch Doctor, and I had Sean Reiner, the drummer for Cynic, Death, whatever you want to call it. He actually sang kind of like in the Obituary style, and so he was doing some vocals with me, and like I borrowed their keyboard and did a intro for it, and you could actually hear Chuck talking in the background and stuff. It's on the tape still, so it's kind of cool. But and then when they were doing spiritual, they were doing spiritual, human, and individual. I was in the studio like at least for one or two sessions, not necessarily in the room like doing anything, but I was hanging out in the lobby, and they'd come out and we'd hang out and talk, or I'd go in and listen to a song after they were kind of done with it. We'd hang out and talk some more. Like I remember distinctly on the individual thought patterns when Andy LaRocque was there. Mm-hmm. And nice. Hanging with Andy and Chuck and Jim Morris, listening to whatever they were working on at the time.
Sweet. Yeah, that's cool.
And then the last time I saw him was at a KISS convention in Orlando. I ran into him there, and we had a quick little chat. And one long after that he announced that he was sick and all that.
Mm. Yeah, we lost the giant.
Yeah, that was horrible. But, he's a great guy, and he was kind of misunderstood a little bit. But yes, I think, I think with time and, like, the internet era, I think maybe, he might have been understood a little better, because people could have gotten him to know him maybe a little better. Because back then there were people who were only like, going what they read off in fanzines or like, Metal Hammer magazine or Rock Hard magazine. There really wasn't an avenue to like get to know somebody, a quick little 10, like a little 30-second clip on MTV, yeah, he's talking, but you don't really get a vibe for what he's really like,
Yep.
So I think maybe with the internet or maybe with like, more communicative ways of, understanding the guy, I think people would have, get a different impression of him. Because like that movie or whatever they did, it kind of made him seem like, he just quit every tour, and it's just not, I don't think he was that bad.
Yeah.
And he was controversial, he had his opinions about how he wanted to do things, that's for sure. And there were certain bands he didn't like and certain bands he did, and just kind of, he was just like anybody, everybody has their opinions, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a super cool guy, I love Chuck. He was great.
Yeah. I had a chat. I was so grateful to Ralph Santola. I had a couple of conversations with him in the 12 months before he passed away, which I was honestly, it was one of those moments. It felt to me like Jim Morrison. People talk about when the Doors ended when Jim Morrison passed away. That was like that for me when Ralph passed away. And I was friends with him on Facebook, and I just thought he was a real sweetheart, And we had a good conversation about his work with Chuck. And one of the things he said was, I wish I had an appreciation for what I was doing and who I was working with at the time. I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but he really recognised, I think, when he was touring. What was the album that he did? It wasn't Symbolic, was it? Oh God, I can't remember now. Sorry, it's escaped me. But it
was Individuals, the one he toured off of.
That's right. Yeah,
because it was Andy LaRocque did the actual solos on that one.
Yeah, there's a
He did the live.
Yeah, have you heard the live stuff that was released with the re-releases where it has Ralph on recording? Have you heard his soloing on that one?
No,
it's epic. It's fantastic. It's I really feel like this might be controversial to some people, but I really feel like as if he didn't join Deicide when he did. I think they were Cactus. With the Hoffman brothers leaving, they really needed a solid shredder to come in and really up the game, because that album, The Stench of Redemption, I think is one of the greatest death metal albums ever, and it really does come down to Ralph's playing. So he's a guy, I think, that is overlooked by a lot of heavy metal fans. But I think for those people that know him, those people who've worked with him, he's a bit like you, mate, if you don't mind me saying. He's an all-rounder, and he's someone who could slot into a lot of different bands. And I'm just so grateful that I had the chance to chat to him before he went on, he passed away, and his contribution, if you like yours again, is so overlooked, man. And you work with a guy who is now in Deicide, or actually he's not. He just left, hasn't he? So Mark English.
Yeah, he's not in Deicide anymore, actually.
His performance on that was good. The fella that with Kevin, how do you pronounce his surname? Is it Quirion or Quirion?
Kevin Quirion.
Yeah. Well, Kevin,
something like that. Yeah.
Kevin, and no disrespect to him at all, but he was underqualified for that gig. Okay, and I don't even think it was probably his fault. Glenn is famously very difficult to work with. Even I've spoken to people that have got first-hand experience working with him that way. Not as musicians, but in a business sense. He's very hard to work with, and I think to put Kevin in that position, because there's that bloody awful YouTube video out there of a performance, I think they were in Europe, where Kevin just, he can't get the solo right. It's like watching a bad rehearsal tape, to be quite honest with you, but they're in front of a couple of thousand people. And I really felt for him. But
in his defense, and sometimes those videos don't, they turn you up. Like when you're hearing it in the room, you're hearing it at one level, and then all of a sudden they're turning it up on the video, or there's something with the sound. Like I had that happen with the Terrorizer. There's like a video where it just, it sounds horrible, but like in the room it sounded fine.
Oh yeah,
one of those things. Sometimes that'll get you. So I wouldn't totally write Kevin off. I think he's a good player, but he's definitely not the lead player that maybe Mark English is, or Ralph was. I think he'd tell you that. I don't think he tries to be anything that he's not. But I think he's been solid for that band. He's been a good member, and he kind of. I know he gets a lot of crap from here and there.
Oh, yeah, I don't disagree with you for a moment.
But,
yeah, I think it was more that he was put into a position to perform songs that he weren't in his wheelhouse, if you know what I'm saying. And that was my point about it. I think he's a wonderful rhythm player, by the way. I wouldn't take anything away from him as a guitarist, but I did review Overtures of Blasphemy. I think that's the name of the album from last year from Deicide, and you can really tell Mark's playing on that one and the influence that it had on it. Because I think the Passage of Existence and that album came out at about the same time, and I think I might have got the Passage of Existence beforehand via eSplit PR. Liz and Mark, they sent it over, and I remember listening to that, and I had that, and of course, because I'm a big Monstrosity fan, I listened to that a lot. And then when the Deicide album came out, I'm like, oh, I can hear this. I can hear Mark's songwriting influence, and if it's not necessarily songwriting influence, it's his the timbre of his playing is very similar. It's a shame. It's a shame that he's not in Deicide, I think, because I know that they've got another guitarist who's a bit of a when I say a not entity, I don't think anybody's really heard of him. But there's a live video. There's 2 live videos out there on YouTube. Anybody can find these, but there's one that features Mark and there's one that features the current guy, and I've got to tell you, Mark's playing is better. Not being critical, I'm just, I'm a fan, and you notice these sorts of things. But it's a shame that I think he's not in the band, because it's that bloody revolving door of guitarists that Glenn's got in place in that band at the moment. I don't think it's going to augur well for them long term. You need that consistency, I think, on recording. I know that Steve does a lot of the songwriting, but if you don't have that consistency on recording, it can make for some very patchy albums. And I think, unfortunately, with the great exception of the wonderful albums that Ralph recorded on, that's what Deicide's career, that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of Deicide's career. It's very patchy. But I'll make my point here, mate, which is that Mark English, is he still in Monstrosity, so to speak? Like, if there was an opportunity for you guys to tour and do what you need to do and bring the music to the people, would he be a part of that package?
Yeah, I mean, he just did the tour we just got off of, so.
Yeah.
We'd kind of planned on him not doing stuff. That's kind of how we ended up bringing in, because I play in a side project with the Tardy Brothers, John and Donald.
Nice.
They have a project called Tardy. It's actually called Tardy Brothers. Mm-hmm. And the guitar player who does all, I guess, Ralph played the leads on the album. So the guy who's playing the Ralph leads on the live shows or whatever, his name's Justin Walker. And we just used him for Monstrosity on this tour that we just did. And it's kind of complicated, but Mark English was going to be off with Deicide. So that's kind of how I started talking to Justin about doing shows and stuff like that. And so we actually used Mark English and Justin Walker for this last tour. And so Mark's still jamming with us, and
cool, yeah,
it's cool. And then as far as Deicide, he was trying to do both. He was going to do what he could do, and as far as doing both gigs, so it was cool. It was kind of interesting. I could hearing Deicide stories and hearing kind of what was going on with those guys. It was like and the way they approach things, and that's one cool thing about this whole thing is that we learn new techniques, learn new tricks, and kind of see where other people are at. Jamming with Obituary, I played drums with them over the summer.
Nice,
a couple shows.
Oh, is that right?
And,
there you go.
Yeah, I did. I did like 5 shows in Europe, and I did like another 5 or 6 in the U.S. Just to fill in, because their drummer had some issues going on at home and he had to take care of. And
that's nice.
So getting to see how their camp works, and it's good for me. I can learn techniques that I can bring back to my band, and without ripping them off. But you know what I mean, just like little things you learn.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, but it's a really positive statement you make there, because you never do stop learning, do you? And for someone like
every show.
Well, for someone like certainly, my feelings about you, mate, is that you've as I've already mentioned, you're so accomplished, but it really does come back down to refining your craft and being able to find different ways of doing things and improving those ways of doing things. And the only way you do that is by doing things with other people a lot of the time. That's the school, that's the university, isn't it, when it comes to music? I've often said that to people, you got to play with as many different people as possible, but you're performing at a very high level. Let's face it, you are performing at an extremely high level. The quality of all of your work has always been magnificent. And to hear that I didn't know that you performed with Obituary. That's quite something.
Yeah, I actually played guitar with him in 2012. I did a South American tour as second guitarist. So I've actually been guitar player and drummer in Obituary, which is
that's fantastic.
Feat that no one can claim.
Yeah. No, that's great, man. That's
so
great.
I like, yeah. Those guys are great. I love them. So it's always fun playing with them.
So let's talk about Terrorizer for a bit, because Caustic Attack, another epic album. Both of those albums, meaning the Monstrosity album, Passage of Existence, and the Terrorizer album, Caustic Attack, were in my top 10 for last year. And it was so unusual to see. I didn't know that you played guitar as well. I mean, I knew you was a drummer, of course, but to see you in some of the videos and to see you in the promotional material as the guitarist for Terrorizer, I was thinking, what's this guy going to do next? Is it Bruce Dickinson style flying planes or something? I mean, it was great to see.
Actually, yes. As a matter of fact, I am learning to fly. So
well, there you go, mate. There's nothing you can't do. Yeah, there's nothing you can't do. But I love that album because it's just so in your face. And I do a lot of swimming, and I swim to that album too. It was one of the albums that I first got into when I bought these Finis headphones, which you can use underwater. And I put it on there, and it's a great album to swim to. It's just got the right beat for everything. But did you write a lot? Did you write a lot of the material on Caustic Attack?
I wrote all the guitar riffs.
Nice. That's another album of yours then.
Yeah.
There you go.
The answer is yeah, pretty much. Sam wrote he came up with the words and some of the patterns, and then I kind of more or less fit the patterns in with the music. But yeah, the guitar riffs are all mine, and at first, Pete, I'd have to I'd show him some riffs or whatever, and he'd kind of pick them apart or whatever, and then eventually, we got to a point where he trusted what I was doing, and I could just come in pretty much with a whole song and say here it is, and so then that's why we ended up with so many songs. And there's actually some more songs too, so there's 5 more that we got. But basically, it was just we got to a point where where he felt comfortable with me, the direction we were headed. So it was kind of freeing for me because I could write, and then just kind of get on with it, and we were able to just come up with more songs a lot quicker, and he. Basically, I was a fan of World Downfall, and the second album and the third album, they're good, but they're just, to me, they're they're kind of they're down-tuned, and they're not, they're kind of over-triggered in the production aspect. Mm-hmm. And so for me personally, I wanted to kind of take it back to the old school way that World Downfall was, a little more organic in the drumming. And so that's why because I'd spent so much time on Passage of Existence, we spent 2 or 3 days getting drum tones, I'd never done that before. It was always 6 hours at Morristown would be a maximum,
Yeah.
Just because time is money and blah, blah, blah. With Jason, the way we worked the deal was a little more relaxed, and we had time to do that with the tones and doing all that. So I kind of wanted to get Pete on board with that way of thinking, and so I brought him out to Audio Hammer where we recorded and showed him kind of we watched some other band, Carnifex, they were doing some drums.
Oh yeah, good band.
We watched them recording a little bit, and then Pete got to see that. He was hearing mine, I was working on the mixes for Passage, and he was hearing that. So I just got him into the idea of recording more natural drum sound, if it can sound like it's triggered, but it's still natural, isn't that the kind of goal you're going with? You know what I mean? The idea of triggering is to get good sound without in an easier way.
Consistent sound, exactly.
This way, it's a little harder work, a lot more work because you have to have a lot of patience, because, you get warmed up and then all of a sudden you're not ready to, because the tom's, not sounding right, or now we got to tweak this, we got to do something, you know what I mean? It just ruins the vibe. But, it's kind of like one of those things where, just deal with it, put up with it, get through it, and in the end we'll have a masterpiece, and that was kind of. So it took a while to get everybody, get Pete on board with that and, show him that, to trust, because for him it would be easier to just go down the street, and record his drums, somewhere in Tampa, versus going to Orlando or Sanford, which actually there's that. We had the killer drum room, if you've seen the video.
I have. That's an awesome video. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a killer drum room, it's like a log cabin this old guy built, and it was where we did the drums. Mm-hmm. Actually cool little drum room, and so pretty much, it's pretty happy with the way everything turned out with that. It was a lot of work, but the end result speaks for itself, really on both albums.
Yeah. What I like too is the that video that you did, I think it was in Germany, where yourself and Pete were talking about drumming. And it's a black and white one. Yeah, I don't know why they shot it. Yeah, Drum Talk. I don't know why they filmed it in black and white or sepia tone, but they did that. But apart from that, the conversation that you both have and the philosophy, the sharing of your philosophy around drums, I think that's essential listening, actual watching in this case here. It's one of those things that it helped make a lot of sense of the album. Now, I'm going to draw a bit of a naff comparison again, like I did before with Weezer, but remember when Metallica did that, the bloody awful album, St. Anger, but then they released that accompanying video of them performing it? And
sure. I think you're going to say the same thing I said just the other day. Keep going.
No, it reminded me of that in that if they hadn't released that video, I would have chucked that. I mean, to be honest, I have thrown the album in the bin, but certainly at the time, it forced me to sort of pay a bit more attention to the album rather than just not listening to it at all. But that's not what I'm saying. Definitely not what I'm saying about Caustic Attack, which I think is an extraordinary album. But it just gave it that fourth dimension, if you like. Watching you guys perform it live and also getting your thoughts and the sharing of your philosophy, if you like, on the album. And it's something that it's probably one of my most watched YouTube videos, actually, that one there, because it's there's so much goodness in that. There's so much goodness in that, and the way that it was edited, I think the editing is a pretty good job too, because it just focused on you guys talking, and the guy basically seemed to get out of your way, and it probably wasn't like that when you were being interviewed, of course. We know how these things go, but I felt like you guys were able to really explain your thoughts on things without too much interference, and it really helped me understand Caustic Attack.
There was actually a lot more that he ended up cutting just because my mic was messing up.
All right, yep.
But, it was really, it's a good one. Definitely, it's cool, too, because it's me and Pete, and it's not just one dimension of either one of us, You kind of get that back and forth. And there was another one, too, from, I think, where was it? Austria, Vienna. This Stormbringer, I think it's called, where we kind of like, I almost become the interviewer, you know what I mean? Because I'm like curious about questions from Pete, because I'm a fan too, I like that World Downfall, like that's a great, that was one of the first records to do those kind of blast beats where they're in time and you can hear the snare.
In time is so true, yeah. I know. I think that's what people sort of miss with some of the early Napalm Death stuff is that, sure, it's seminal stuff, but it's not exactly musical, meaning that the musicians hadn't quite got the command of the instrument that was probably necessary. And then you go to the other side of that with Raymond Herrera and the Fear Factory guys where it's just too triggered and it sounds too artificial. Right. And my opinion on that's why I know plenty of people that think this way, actually, but that's why I think the Fear Factory stuff hasn't stood the test of time, because it sounds too artificial. Whereas if you talk about Millennium, that's why that has stood the test of time, because it does sound very organic and it sounds like it was created by musicians. you know, and
Right.
And sorry, you're going to make another point earlier. I want to go back to it, but we're talking about Sananga. I still can't believe, all these years later, I still can't believe they bothered to release it. But you're going to draw a parallel between 2 points that I was making. Can you remember what that was?
Well, my thing with that was that, you know, it was having the video to go with the CD. You know, it's like that almost sounds better than the record itself. You know,
yeah,
the
it does,
DVD
yeah.
part. And like, I think, you know, I know, you know, particularly with that album, their goal was to, like, everybody was, like, involved in the writing. Like, if you weren't in the room, then they didn't use the riff. I don't know if you remember that part of the story, but that was part of their little thing at the time. So it becomes art by committee, you know, and that to me is, you know, can be a bad thing, you know.
Yeah.
So that rule there kind of, like, might have messed things up, but, like, you know, like, at least they were going for it, man. There's a lot of fast double bass parts and a lot of skank beats, you know, those kind of thrashy beats or whatever you want to call them. So, like, I think they had good intentions with it, but, like, you know, the art by committee thing got in the way. They were trying to make a garbage, you know, like, I won't say garbage garage, we'll say garage sounding production, you know, like, where they were trying to keep it raw. Like, the idea was there, but it just was, you know, it just wasn't executed, you know, in the long run correctly. Whereas they probably could have re-recorded it in, like, 3 days and come up with a better sounding record. And, you know, maybe just the songs weren't that good, like, you know, and, you know, if you would have had better songs. And, but yeah, the trash can snare drum doesn't help things for sure, and the production. But like the song Saint Anger, like, I think the song Saint Anger could be crafted into a good song if they put some more work into it, do a little production on it, maybe clean some parts up here and there. And not that I'm, you know, second guessing Metallica, but, you know, just that's my opinion. I think, you know, like, because it was at least thrash metal again, you know.
Well, look, they wouldn't give a shit, but I'm done with the band, to be honest with you. I can't even listen to them anymore. To me, they've released so many shit albums over the last 20 years that I can't even listen to the stuff from the 80s that really got me into heavy metal, the Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning, and I don't even care anymore. I get so frustrated listening to Lars's drum sound and the way he drums, which just isn't up to par. I've long said that I think he needs a Chris Adler or a Tim Young to step into the fold. Or you, man, even you. Like, I'm not saying even you, but I know you're busy with other things. But, I mean, I compare, say, your drumming and your level of, your accomplished drumming to his drumming, mate. And you know what he reminds me of? And I've written this online, so it's out there for people to read, but Lars reminds me of the bloke that bought penny stocks, and the stock, he bought, say, 50 or 60% of the shares in a particular stock, like Apple back in like 1979 or 1981 or whenever it was. And he just sat back and just watched this stock increase in value without really contributing too much. And I know people disagree and they go, oh, look, he does the arrangements and all the rest of it. But really, that band's all about James, because James is just such a fantastic musician, great vocalist, great rhythm guitar player. I just feel like on that, like particularly on that last album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, there were some okay songwriting on that one there, but it was ruined by Lars's overly simplistic drumming. It's like he's regressing, but he's doing it on album.
Well, you know, probably what's it, you know, I mean, he's got millions of dollars. He's not worrying about it, you know. He's concentrating on hanging out somewhere, doing other things, you know. It's a craft. You got to put time into it, you know. That's the biggest secret of the biz is time, investing time into it, you know. And like that's why, you know, maybe the new album's one of our better ones, because we had the extra time to really just craft everything and, like, build it up, bring it down, rebuild it again, you know, and, like, really focus on it. Whereas they're in such a machine, they got to get something out, you know, and he's just not putting it, you know, he's not investing the time. I know what you're saying,
but
you know?
Where's the inner critic? So you're somebody you're obviously of a high intellect, okay?
He's listening to Muse, and he's listening to U2, and, like, he's just not concerned with, he's not listening to the new Dark, you know, the new Dark Funeral or the new
I get
whatever.
that. Yeah, I believe me, I get that. I think it's just there's not that inner critic for him to sit back and. I saw him in They toured Brisbane here in 2010, and he was shit. Sorry, I mean it's for somebody. I'm a musician, and I'm casting judgment from the perspective that you're paying to watch somebody, and he's out of time half the time. And James even said to him, and I kid you not, James even said to him halfway through the performance, it might have been Battery. He stopped at the end of Battery and he stared at Lars and he goes, "Well, three of us stopped on time." and I think it went over the top of people's heads in the audience, and you could. I remember turning to my buddy at the time. I can't remember who I went with now, but I remember saying, "Well, there you go." There's going to be a stern conversation maybe after the gig in the green room with Lars about that one there, but for James even to say that, I mean, you can't kick him out of the band. I get that. It's practically his band. I understand that. But, for a band that has turned into a brand but is a beloved entity, Metallica, fans, I can't understand their continued success.
You'd think he'd get some drum lessons, to be honest. You'd think he'd get Derek Roddy over for the day and have him show him some licks.
A good name. Yeah, there's a great name, Derek Roddy. Yeah, there are so many wonderful drummers out there in heavy metal that could do a job with one hand that he can't even do with two at this point in time.
Right.
And I just think, dude, to your point earlier, he made you millions. You've got it. You're successful. You're famous. And I've made this point online as well. I've do blog entries and shit. And I said maybe he should just step out and be executive producer and let a Chris Adler step in. Somebody like that who can probably follow instructions and really get the drumming side of things and is available for touring and all of that sort of stuff. And not suggesting that you get a revolving door of musicians, but I'd really love to hear how a band would sound with an accomplished drummer, and
right.
And I don't know how he got through And Justice for All. I don't know how he did that. I have a feeling a lot of that was patched together, though. I haven't read anything or.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think they admit that, but it was what it was. He did it for the time. I was still like, I wasn't that good back then when he was doing it. So like. Maybe, hopefully I progress past that, at this point. So I can see,
You definitely progressed well past that point. You're one of the most accomplished drummers I've ever heard. I mean, it's your drumming is really one of those things where Lars simply couldn't do what you do. He's not even in the same planet, really. Sorry, excuse me for coughing, but he's not even anywhere near your merit.
But then there's kids that are coming along that are going to be, they're just like they're so ridiculous these days. There's, what I mean? It's kind of a generational thing. It's like there's kids that are just so fast and they can play, the solo from whatever song, that's totally impossible. You know what I mean? Mm. So like you'll have. Like for us, when we were in high school, Slayer was fast. You know what I mean? It's like they're just not that fast now because there's a million bands that are doing that and doing it better. Because of time. They've had the time to evaluate what was being done and improve upon it. Whereas, like maybe with Lars, he got to, he was at a certain level, but we studied it and we. You know what I mean? We took it to another place, hopefully. You know what I mean? So, like, I'm sure the same thing is happening with death metal. There's kids that are looking at what we're doing and, going to take it to another level. There's that kid that's in his rehearsal room right now who you haven't heard of him yet because he's just in there woodshedding every day, practicing to get better to when he can, for his time to shine, and then there's going to be that guy that comes and just blows you away. That was always our thing is, like even with Malevolent, we were looking for the unknown shredder, the guys out there, some kid, like Jason Morgan, for example, on the Millennium album, that guitar player, he's
fantastic.
Yeah. He's from Tennessee, dude. And like, he just sits in his room and like learns albums like at the drop of a dime. He just can, at the time, he was he learned images and words like just like in a couple of days, and and then he'd play a Kiss Alive 1, he'd play it from start to finish, and even all the little sounds, the accidents, and like he had every little part of it, you know what I mean? So like there's kids out there that are doing that for our band. You know what I mean? And back to the cover band thing, it's definitely good to learn covers because those are, you're picking up styles that you just wouldn't have otherwise, And so learning there's bands out, I never play cover songs. I don't want to be influenced by somebody else, Yeah. Well, chances are you can't jam either,
Yeah,
no
exactly.
offense, but...
Yeah. Oh, no, I agree with you. Oh, look, I've had people in rehearsal studios say to me, you're whoring yourself out, are you? It's like, fuck off. What do you know? I'm a working musician.
Experience,
Yeah, I get the shits with it. I say to I mentioned earlier I'm back at uni these days, and so I'm in my 40s, and I'm at uni with all the 20-year-olds and the late teens, and I'm on the Bond University Music Appreciation in the group or whatever, the Facebook group, and in the society there on campus. And I've actually said to people, look, do you want to start a hard rock covers band like I was mentioning earlier? But that's where I'm doing it. I'm doing it at uni, and man, you'd be surprised. I've had quite a few people hit me up and go, yeah, I'm interested, but they haven't quite got the experience yet for it to sort of bear fruit. So I'm happy to sort of take time with it all, but it's really cool to see that people recognise that that's an opportunity worth taking. And I simply cannot understand snobby attitudes toward being a covers musician, because it's how you become a better musician, is by performing on stage in front of people. That's how you learn how to react quickly. It's a bit like being the Cricket World Cup's on at the moment. Cricket a bit like baseball, but watching this Cricket World Cup last night, as I was doing, Australia were playing Bangladesh. I mean, those guys, this is not their first series, obviously. These guys have been practicing their batting for probably tens of thousands of hours, and a lot of that would be in local competitions here in Australia or playing county cricket in the UK. They're performing in front of people, is what I'm saying, and you've got to do that. You can't just stay in the nets and then expect that to translate to being out on the field or up on stage. It doesn't work that way, and that's where covers music is such a great opportunity for people. And apart from that, it's really cool, as you well know, as you play every weekend, seeing people dancing to music that you're producing, and you can see how happy it makes them.
Right. Yeah. And never mind the financial benefits, just so that you can work on your real music. It's like, that's one thing that's good for me. It just frees my time up, that I'm not. It's easier to spend 3 hours at a cover gig on a Friday night and then have the rest of the week to chill,
Yeah, no, that's
work
cool.
on my music.
That's cool. Mate, I better wrap things up because I've got to go and get the kids' lunches ready. It's almost 7 a.m. here, but I could honestly keep on talking to you, man. It's such a thrill to finally talk to you, I must say. You're one of those guys, and you'll appreciate this, when you get a CD and you look at the picture of somebody and you go, holy shit, that's what, in your case, this is what Lee looks like, and then you see you on videos and stuff, and you really look up to you from afar. I'm not a drummer, of course, but I'm a guitarist and bass player, as I mentioned, and it's the quality of your work, and I know it's very meaningful, the quality, and you wouldn't believe this, but the person I was interviewing yesterday was Trey Exacto's mother. I had a chat to her.
Oh, yeah?
Lovely conversations, just a lovely, lovely lady, and we went really deep into Trey's performance, and she mentioned something to me that I don't think's out there in the public domain. I better not say it actually, because I've got to get her approval, but I'll tell you when I sort of finish the podcast episode, I'll tell you what she told me that isn't in the public domain. But it was really interesting getting the insight from her about how he became the musician that he became. And it's the same thing for you. It's sort of, I love getting to be able to sort of go backstage in a virtual sense and sort of find out what influence and what inspires a musician. So, mate, I want to thank you so much for giving me your time.
No problem. So what's the news with Morbid Angel?
So she told me that he's got Asperger's. And I was like, keep this to yourself, obviously.
She does or he does?
He does. I didn't know that's probably old news to you, but yeah, I mean, please don't share that, because I've got to get her approval to release the podcast episode. But yeah, she told me that, and it made so much sense, because he doesn't do interviews, and on some of the interviews that he has done, he's very fidgety and he's very uncomfortable, but he's got that tunnel vision, I think is what she described it as, where he's able to just focus intently on something and craft it to excellence like he can do. Because I think he's a genius, to be honest. So I just love his work.
Well, are they touring, or what are they going to do?
Again, please keep this to yourself. So I'm trusting you with this. She mentioned that they've got a US tour coming up in November. That's definitely not public domain, so please don't share that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in.
Yeah, she wasn't even sure whether she should share that one with me. Yeah, so she said that, and apart from that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's happening with the other guys in the band. I think obviously Steve and Trey will stay in Forces permanently, because that seems like the partnership moving forward. But she gave me a lot of insight. Let me tell you, there was a lot of information there that I was like, holy shit, I did not know that. And I'm a big fan. I'm a mega fan, I suppose you'd call me. And I thought I knew everything there was to know, but apparently not. Well,
there's a new Mike Browning interview out too that kind of
he's
tells some old Morbid Angel stories. It's kind of interesting.
Well, he's in Chile at the moment. I just had a Facebook Messenger conversation with him yesterday, Mike Browning. So he's coming up soon.
Oh, cool, man.
I'll be talking to him soon.
Cool, man.
It's been a really good week, man. Let me tell you. There's yourself, there's Janelle, and Mike coming up. So it's been a really good week for interviews, I must say.
Excellent, man. Well, I appreciate it, bro. Thanks for all the support, man, and hopefully it works out for you, man.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gents. That was a repost of the conversation that occurred back in June 2019 with the great Lee Harrison of Monstrosity and Terrorizer. Now, if you enjoyed that one, there are many more just like it over at scarsandguitars.com. And if you like listening, maybe you like reading too. And you're also in luck, because I've written a book. Scars and Guitars, Conversations from the World of Hard Rock, Heavy Metal and Beyond, Volume 1. I'm working on Volume 2 as I do this narration. Check out Volume 1 though by clicking on a link in the banner of the website. You'll be taken to a marketplace of your choice, and yeah, if you do decide that you want to download a sample and complete the purchase, hit me up, because I want to thank you personally. I've got some more information to share with you about the book in the moment, but before we get to that, I'll bid you a fond farewell. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I'm the host of the Scars and Guitars podcast. Until next time, it's a very goodbye for now.
This is Eric Rattan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew Mackay-Smith.
I've been the host of the Scars and Guitars podcast since 2017. The first musician I interviewed for the show was David Vincent from Morbid Angel, and things have just snowballed from there. In all, I've posted almost 650 podcast episodes featuring conversations with many of the leading lights of rock, heavy metal, and beyond. It just got to a point where I thought, I need to write a book about all this, so that's exactly what I did. In Scars and Guitars Volume 1, you'll read a heap of deep reveals and commentary, such as Des Fafara talking about Coal Chamber and why the band will never return.
You know, if you're a band just starting out, you need to hear me. Do not start a band with partners. Ever.
Yeah, wise words there. Sage advice, mate, for anybody.
Don't ever, because I can't go do Coal Chamber right now unless I get others involved.
Phil Anselmo talks about the episode in his career which gives him the greatest sense of accomplishment.
I think the staying power of the fans and the staying power of the songs, you know, whether it's Pantera, Down, or Superjoint, the fans remember the songs.
Alex Skolnick from Testament confirms that, yes, playing the guitar in Ozzy's band is anything but an ordinary gig. Will Silent Oz from Dimmu Borgir write a book? Pa from Sabaton gives advice to people who want to start a band.
Look at the team around you, look at the bandmates. If the guys want to be on the stage, then it's all cool. If the guys want to be backstage, then it's not going to be cool.
Current and former members of Cradle of Filth discuss the band's seminal 90s material. Read about the reaction to George Lynch and Mark from Suicide Silence's comments when they throw shade at then President Donald Trump.
We have this idiotic monster, you know, this egotistical, self-aggrandizing, complete piece of shit in there. I just can't understand how we've gotten to this place.
And yeah, we kicked a hornet's nest with Sepultura. Percussive overlord Gene Hoglan talks about recording with Chuck Schuldiner.
Chuck was always, he was very open-minded, and he was into having his musicians that were playing with him just reach out for the best stuff that they had.
Phil Campbell from Motorhead discusses what it takes to get sober. John Five answers his critics who dismiss his tenure with Marilyn Manson.
You know, my name is John Five, and Manson gave me that name, and I had some of the best years of my life in that band and learned a lot.
And we get the lowdown on Trey Exagtoth from those who would know, including his mother. All across Scars and Guitars Volume 1, there are moments of tension, relief, tragedy, exhilaration, and throughout it all, you'll obtain insight that I believe no one else has managed to obtain from many of your favourite artists. So treat yourself. Scars and Guitars Volume 1 is currently available as an ebook with a print edition on the horizon. Follow the links attached and download a sample. I'm sure you'll be compelled to read the whole book.